You already know that eating high carbohydrates, yes, that's rice, or high sugar is bad for you because it raises your blood glucose or blood sugar, and that can lead to a lot of problems like insulin resistance or diabetes or even obesity. But my guest in this episode shares how carbohydrates may not be the problem that we think it is. It's actually something else. Find out exactly what may be causing the diabetes and the obesity epidemic that the world is experiencing right now. This is such great information that you must know. If you're enjoying the show, please make sure to hit the subscribe button down below so you can get notified when we release new episodes. The goal of this show is to help you look and feel younger and even reverse your aging. I'll see you inside. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Anti-Aging Hacks podcast. Today, I have a very, very special guest. His name is Dr. Rick Johnson. And in terms of an introduction, he is the Thomas Pearl Professor of Medicine and Chief of the Renal Division and Hypertension at the University of Colorado since 2008. His research, which has been funded by the NIH, has focused on the role of sugar and especially fructose in driving obesity, diabetes, high blood pressure, and kidney disease. Much of his work has explored the role of fructose metabolism, especially the generation of uric acid in driving this phenotype. And his work has included studies ranging from molecular biology, integrative physiology, and evolutionary biology. He's the author of The Sugar Fix, which introduced the first low fructose diet, and also The Fat Switch, which explores the role of fructose in driving this obesity epidemic. So I'm super excited. And he has lectured in over 40 countries and has a list of honors that is pages long, so I'll skip it in the interest of time. But I will reference it as we talk about this or we go through the interview. So with that said, Rick, welcome to the Anti-Aging Hacks podcast.
Oh, thank you very much. And thank you for the very warm welcome and introduction. I should just mention I'm no longer the chief of the kidney division. I did step down and I'm focusing more on research and clinical, but everything else is accurate.
Okay, fantastic. Now, what I want you to do as we get started here, Rick, is just to give the audience a brief background about you and the circuitous role that you have taken in getting to what you do today. So give us a background of who you are and what you do.
So I'm a medical doctor. I see patients, but I've also had a long time interest in research, and I've been doing medical research since the late 1980s, really. And my research has, I'm a specialist in kidney disease, as well as general medicine and actually infectious diseases. But my research started in the kidney, but it migrated out of the kidney into high blood pressure and obesity and metabolic syndrome. And in that process, I discovered that sugar was really, really important in driving obesity and diabetes. And so my research has involved trying to figure out how sugar causes obesity and diabetes. What's special about it? Is it just a calorie or is there something more to it? And our studies took us deep into many fields, from studying hibernating bears and natives in southern Venezuelan jungles to doing classic animal experiments and laboratory experiments in physiology, to even exploring history and evolution and how that might have played a role in this whole thing. So I ventured pretty far away from the world of the kidney, although I still publish a lot in the kidney and I know a lot about the kidney. But the sugar story has been one that has been very fun and exciting to try to figure it out.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating story, and I can't wait to ask you a lot of questions. I originally had 100 questions, but I've pared those down in the interest of time. So Rick, you're an elite expert, one of the world's best in this topic. Looking you up in Google Scholar, you come up with hundreds of scientific papers that you're a part of, you've contributed to. And what's remarkable about some of these papers is that the references to these papers are nearing 100,000, which just literally boggles my mind. I've never seen anything like it. So kudos to you. In a way of getting started, Rick, let's talk about Let's level set the nomenclature when it comes to sugar because it's super confusing. We have sugar, we have fructose, we have sucrose, we have dextrose, we have high fructose corn syrup, and we have glucose. What do all these mean? Can you break them down quickly for us?
Absolutely. So sugar, when most people talk about sugar, they're talking about sucrose or table sugar. And that's what most of the conversations have been about, is about table sugar or sucrose. And sucrose consists of two simple sugars. They're called simple sugars because they're like single sugars that are bound together. And one is glucose and one is fructose. So sucrose or table sugar contains both glucose and fructose. Fructose is also the sugar that's in fruit. It's what we classically view as healthy. Fruits are considered very healthy, and fructose is the sugar that's in fruits and in honey. Glucose is the other sugar, and that's a sugar that's broken down from starch. So things like starchy foods, when you eat them, they produce glucose. And then when we eat glucose, we like the glucose because it's one of our principal fuels in our body. So we love glucose. And when we say blood sugar, we don't mean blood sucrose because there's no sucrose in the blood. We mean blood glucose. So blood sugar is glucose, and glucose is a fuel in the blood. And if the glucose levels get too high, it can be a sign of diabetes. Okay, so to get back to it, there's basically two simple sugars, fructose and glucose. And fructose is in fruit, glucose is in starches and potatoes and things like that. And then sucrose or table sugar consists of one molecule of each bound together. So it's a 50-50 ratio. Now, they're complicating this was the introduction of another sweetener in the 1970s called high fructose corn syrup. And some people just say HFCS is his favorite abbreviation for this sweetener. And this is actually what they did is they took corn, which mainly is glucose, contains mainly glucose, and they treated it with chemicals or chemistry. It's basically an enzymatic reaction, but they treated it to convert some of the glucose to fructose. And when they do that, they now have a mixture of glucose and fructose, and they can adjust the ratio. And it turns out that although people like sugar, which is a 50-50 ratio, they tend to prefer in taste testing a little bit more fructose, like 55-45, 60-40. So the high fructose corn syrup's been adjusted to try to make it even more attractive to us. And so the other thing is it's liquid, so it can be mixed into foods pretty well. Doesn't crystallize in the freezer. It's pretty inexpensive. And so this sweetener is often used like in desserts and sweets and soft drinks. So you'll often see high fructose corn syrup on a package. It's really a type of sugar. It's got both fructose and glucose in it. It's just slightly different from table sugar.
Thank you for explaining all of these, which now
Sugar
we can
101.
have a sugar 101. Now we can have a more nuanced discussion moving forward. But I started paying attention, Rick, as I got serious about my health a few years ago, and I started looking at the packaging and the processed food section of grocery stores, and I was honestly shocked at how much high fructose corn syrup I would see, or added sugars I would see in a lot of packaging. It seems to be everywhere around us.
Those studies have shown that we call them added sugars when you add sucrose or table sugar or high fructose corn syrup. These are the two major added sugars, and they're added to foods to make it more delicious. And ketchup and stuff like that, they'll sweeten it. They have sugar in the ketchup and things, and they put a little bit of sugar in it, and even just subtle amounts can make food taste better. So it's put in crackers and a lot of processed foods, and maybe 70 or 80% of processed foods, and probably about 75% of drinks. So it's in power energy drinks, power drinks, and that kind of thing, as well as they often add sugar to juice. So you can have a fruit punch that has some fruit juice in it, but on top of the fructose and stuff from the fruits, there's also sugar been added.
Jeez.
So yeah, it's amazing how much sugar makes up of our diet, and some studies suggest that about 15% of our average diet comes from sugars, added sugars, and some people are eating more. So there are children, adolescents, young adults that eat a lot of junk food, drink a lot of sodas, and some of them are reaching 25% or more of their total caloric intake is
Wow.
these added sugars. So it's a big issue.
So coming back to that, where you'd mentioned, Rick, that more fructose is being added as compared to glucose. What does glucose even taste like?
So glucose is sweet, but it's not as sweet. So it's very interesting, Faraz, because if you put glucose you put it in water and offer it to mice or laboratory rats, the little white rats in the cages that we study, they like glucose and they like fructose and they like sucrose. They like all sugars. And not as much lactose, which is the sugar in milk, but they do really like glucose, and they'll drink lots of glucose water and they'll drink a lot of fructose water. And so, although it's not as sweet, animals do like it, but it's very interesting. You get different reactions in the brain. So if a human drinks glucose, which is also known as dextrose, okay, it basically stimulates a little bit of pleasure. Dopamine gets released, but it also increases cortical brain activity. And it's actually been associated with improvement in performance, like in athletes or in school children. If they're given glucose, it tends to improve performance, provided the blood glucose levels don't go too high. As soon as the blood glucose levels get too high, then performance fails or falls. And so, they've done lots of studies. So glucose tends to increase your ability to concentrate unless you raise the glucose levels in your blood too high. Now, if you give fructose to a human, they get a dopamine response as well. But the difference is they get decreased cortical brain activity. It goes down. That's actually associated with a loss of willpower. And you can test and show that they're hungry. Fructose actually kind of induces a hunger state, and it reduces your willpower to say no to things like chocolates and desserts and so forth. So, and that part of that's from that decrease in mental cortical activity. So the two sugars do act differently, not only in animals but in humans. But both, everybody likes both. It's just that they do different things. And it's that fact that they do different things which made me very interested, because the two sugars are almost identical in structure, and yet, or at least in chemical formula, and yet they have such different effects in animals. And so that was one of the key observations we had that made us realize that the two were functioning quite differently.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because when you talk about dextrose, a few years ago, I was working out really hard, and I subscribed to the old thought of, within 15 minutes of finishing a hard workout, you had to douse yourself with a bunch of glucose, and you had to eat, a lot of protein. And so I'd have this protein shake sitting in my car that was 20 grams of dextrose and a lot of protein powder, just to make sure I got what I needed, because I tore all these muscle fibers in the gym. I now know that that's not true. You don't need protein right away. But I used to basically down dextrose back in the day. So, and yeah, you're right.
I used to be at the University of Florida, where I was the Gatorade professor, and I worked with. I actually was a very good friend of Bob Cate, who invented Gatorade.
Interesting.
And his whole crew, and he was still working there, when I was there, and became quite close. And he was a absolutely wonderful, brilliant individual. But what he did, yeah, the Gatorade story is sort of a quick, cute little story. He was worried about these athletes that were like working out, and in the Florida heat, and they call it the swamp there in Gainesville, and it can get really hot, and some of these guys were like passing out, or getting very lightheaded during these massive workouts that they would have, and Cade got interested and started studying them, and he saw that some of them were losing like 10 pounds
Wow.
of water in an afternoon. I mean, like a huge amount,
Yeah.
okay? Like 5 kilos, 6 kilos of sweat. And in those days, they were treating them with water and salt taps. And he went to a conference, a national medical conference, where the scientists from Boston had discovered that the absorption of salt in the body is dramatically facilitated with adding a little glucose. And when you give glucose, you can get much more salt on board. And also he's realized that these guys, when they were working out, that their glucose levels in their blood started to fall a little bit, and they were actually consuming a lot of glucose. So his first attempt at making Gatorade was to give water with salt, but where he added the glucose to get that extra absorption of salt. It was a brilliant move, and it worked. He gave it to the B squad, and they beat the varsity team on a scrimmage over the weekend, and it wasn't supposed to happen, and because the coach didn't want to give this mysterious fluid to the varsity team. So the B team got it, and then they beat the varsity team. Anyway, and then the trouble is that, we talked about how people like glucose. They don't like it as much as sugar. And so when he first gave the drinks to these athletes, one of them was, in particular, it's a famous story. One of them turned to Bob Cade and said, Bob, this tastes like piss. And he poured it over his head. And Cade said, well, that's actually, you're still doing a good thing. You're cooling down with my fluid anyway. So you may not be drinking it, but it's probably helping you. But the problem was that the glucose drinks are not as, they still are liked, believe it or not, but they're nothing like a soft drink. So what they ended up doing was they ended up adding a small amount of fructose, just like 1-2%. And that was able to sweeten the drink and make it more tasty. And then later the sugar contents changed a little bit, and the sugar contents went up. And then later they started realizing to reduce the sugar contents so that the fructose content in particular was lower. But yeah. And then one of the interesting things is the fructose actually accelerated the glucose absorption, so it improved performance. So not only was it a palatable thing, but small amounts of fructose actually accelerated glucose absorption. It's another interesting story in sugar science. But anyway, so getting back to, glucose is an important fuel, and if you're exercising a lot, it can be beneficial so long as you don't give too much.
And we'll come back to too much because I have some questions around that, Rick. First, I want to go a little bit, dive a little bit deeper into the metabolism of, I would say, let's talk about glucose and compare and contrast that with the metabolism of fructose. So the listeners, again, as we level set on the different types of sugars, let's level set on the two different types of metabolism in the body, and then we'll dig deeper into fructose, if that's okay. So if you would start with glucose first.
No, I think that's a great way to go. So when we started studying sugar, we knew that there was something special about fructose, because our studies were showing that fructose was particularly capable of inducing metabolic syndrome and in animals. And so we were very interested in why that was. And what we just kind of fell upon was a story that's pretty significant. And the story is that when you eat food, you're eating it to make energy. You're eating it to increase the energy in your body so that you can do the things you want to do. Our body lives off the energy we eat.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens is almost all foods act to make energy. But the problem is that when you break down food and you try to turn it into, ATP, which is our energy source, when you do that, you actually use some energy to make energy. So you
Mm-hmm.
can't just turn that food into energy. You have to actually use some of your own energy to convert it into more energy. And the goal is, of course, to end up with a lot more energy than you had before.
Right.
All right. So all foods do this, but there's one food that is sort of tricky, and that is fructose. And what fructose does is that you have to consume some energy to break down fructose, just like you do with glucose. But with glucose, if the energy levels start to fall inside the body or inside the cells,
Mm-hmm.
there's like this feedback system that turns on that says, hey, we don't want the energy in our body to go down. We want it to go up. And we're going to stop this reaction until our energy levels recover. And then we're going to continue to break down the glucose until we make a lot of energy. So if the energy starts getting consumed such that the ATP level starts to drop a little bit, the energy in the cell, the whole reaction is slowed down so that that doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true for basically all foods. When you eat foods, your energy levels don't, even though you're using a little energy, there's a feedback system to keep the energy levels from falling. However, with fructose, it's like the body wants your energy level to fall. And what happens is when you eat fructose, there's this enzyme that uses energy to break down fructose, and it's not regulated. It's like a runaway train. It's on, and it will metabolize the fructose as quickly as it sees it. And so energy levels can drop in these cells.
Mm-hmm.
And people have shown that if you drink a soft drink and you use a special imaging of the liver, the energy levels in the liver will fall acutely within minutes. It's a quick burn. It's sort of like a rapid burn.
Mm-hmm.
Temperature goes up a little bit, and the energy levels plummet in the cell, maybe by 20-30%.
Wow, that's
Especially
significant.
in the liver. And that is significant. And that's like an alarm signal. And
Mm-hmm.
the body inside the cell, it can't separate whether or not you're starving or whether or not it's just an alarm. The energy levels go down, and it triggers a response by the animal to that. It's time to try to put on food, put on fat, try to restore your energy. So it stimulates hunger, and it stimulates thirst, and it stimulates the foraging for food, and it stimulates the production of fat, and it stimulates insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is actually it's a survival pathway, believe it or not. I don't know if when you become insulin resistant, what it means is so normally when you eat glucose, it stimulates the hormone insulin. And insulin then drives glucose into the muscle and the liver and so forth, where it can use it to make fat and other things. So when you eat glucose, the muscles like the glucose, and so that's where it likes to go. A lot of it goes to the muscles, some to the liver. But the brain also uses glucose. And the brain, maybe 1/6 of all the energy in our body goes to the brain. The brain is using a lot of our energy. So if there's an alarm signal and there's low energy in your cells, that's like a thing that says, oh my God, we're running out of food, we're running out of energy, we got to eat more, we got to put on more fat, we got to do everything we can to help us. But we have to protect our brains, because if our brain doesn't work, we're going to be eaten by a predator. And so what it does is it generates insulin resistance, and that prevents the glucose from getting into the muscle or reduces the amount. And the glucose is preferentially saved for the brain, because the brain, most of the brain, does not require insulin. And so a lot of the brain can get that glucose when you're insulin resistant. So insulin resistance, you'll see it in animals that are starving. You'll see it in settings like when you give fructose, and animals that are trying to store fat will become insulin resistant because they reduce their this whole process includes reducing your metabolism, so you move less, but it's resting energy metabolism that's really reduced, so that you can still forage for food, but then your energy at rest has dropped. And the result of all that is to protect you. And so fructose, when it drops the energy acutely, there's also a set of chemical reactions that end up keeping the energy level down. So the energy level will stay down for a longer time. It's not like a dip and then come back up. It's like a dip and then it stays low. And then and there's a relative shift of the food you eat to make more fat than ATP. And so the energy level, which it measures, is reflecting the ATP, stays low even as you're eating. And then eventually the ATP levels get replenished, but at the expense of eating a lot more food and storing a lot more fat. And then the fat is a stored form of energy. And now what's happened is your fat, you've broken this normal way of keeping your weight at a tight level. You've broken that system, and you've allowed yourself to increase your fat. You've replenished your energy. And now you're feeling better, but now you're a little fatter.
Right. There's a lot that's happened. Like the way you describe it, there's so much that's going on in just a few minutes of eating or drinking a soda or eating something like a fruit juice with added sugars even, that's causing all these systems to go a different pathway than they would regularly, at least with glucose. So I want to come back to a couple of things here, but I think one thing you said, Rick, is so profound. I want to reiterate, and what you said is that insulin resistance is a survival mechanism, which confounds a lot of people, the biohackers, the people that are tracking their high glucose and high insulin levels, because we've been learning that high glucose causes high insulin. Both of these together lead to all kinds of problems, insulin resistance, diabetes, obesity, and all the confounding major diseases from then on. But what you're suggesting is that insulin resistance actually can help the body because it restricts. And to that point, 80% or so, or a huge amount of the blood sugar that we have, glucose in our body, is sucked in by the muscles. And so this is actually a protective mechanism where it says muscles, you can't take any more glucose because the brain needs it. Therefore, it's maybe not as bad as traditionally we think it is.
Let me help you out here. So you're exactly right. If you are starving, or if insulin resistance is life-saving because it keeps the glucose is provided to the brain. Okay, so it is a part of a survival response. And you can show it if you try to starve animals, but you can also show it by giving them fructose. Animals that are trying to store fat usually will activate this survival system because it allows them to become fat. So hibernating bears, before they hibernate, they become insulin resistant. Or long distance migrating birds, before they migrate, they become insulin resistant because when they're flying those long distances, they have to preserve the glucose for their brain and so forth. So so you're correct about that. The big problem is that what was a survival switch what was a survival mechanism that these animals used by eating fructose, that switch, when you continue to feed it, when you continue to eat the 70% processed foods filled with sugar, that overflows the system, and what was insulin resistance becomes diabetes, and what was elevated blood pressure to help you maintain your circulation is now driving hypertension, and the changes in the brain actually are probably involved in the development of Alzheimer's or long term, so this survival system, when it's chronically activated, when it's persistently activated, is bad. Now, if you like, I could go into a very, I think, an important aspect of insulin resistance and insulin, because many people probably on your podcast probably use continuous glucose monitors.
Yes, they do.
And I even have one because I believe in it. These are monitors to measure your blood glucose, and with the idea being that you don't want to be insulin resistant and you don't want to have your glucose levels high. And if you like, I can tell you our big discovery related to this. Because,
absolutely, Rick.
Okay.
Go right into it.
So we found that fructose causes insulin resistance. So by activating this drop in energy, activates the survival system, and that causes insulin resistance. When we were first studying this, and glucose was not causing a drop in ATP, so we were thinking differently from many people, that the danger of sugar was not the glucose in it, or the danger of sucrose was not the glucose component, it was the fructose component. And that the fructose was what was driving the low energy, activating this terrible system that caused weight gain and all those things. Now, you probably know that when you give glucose to an animal, it stimulates insulin, and the insulin moves the glucose into the cell. If you give fructose to an animal, insulin isn't stimulated. So fructose is what you call a low glycemic food, because it doesn't raise blood glucose very much acutely. So over time, you chronically eat fructose, your blood glucose goes up because you become insulin resistant. But if I just give you a dose of fructose, your glucose won't go up. Whereas if I give you a piece of bread, your glucose will go up.
Absolutely. Does fructose mainline straight to the liver, Rick, or does it get absorbed by the intestines?
It gets absorbed by the intestines and the liver, and a little bit in other parts of the brain, brain and islets. But the main site is the liver. It's true.
Okay.
So anyway, so this seemed to be a paradox, because a lot of people say, well, you know what drives obesity is the high glucose. And so when I eat bread and my blood glucose goes up, or I eat sugar and my blood glucose goes up, that's stimulating insulin, and that's causing obesity. Correct. And yet what I was showing was that if you give fructose, that causes obesity. And if I gave starch to just regular rats with no sugar, there was very little obesity. So this, in fact, we did a study where we starved animals. We put them on a diet, a big one, and we gave them exactly the same number of calories. And one had a high sugar content in the diet. It was still low calorie. And the other one had a high starch content, and the sugar ones all developed diabetes and fatty liver, and the starch ones didn't. So I was getting convinced that it wasn't bread that was the problem. It was sugar that was the problem, and it wasn't the glucose in sugar. It was the fructose in sugar. And then I was on a web thing with Jimmy Low Carb, Jimmy Levita Low Carb, whatever. Yeah. He's really a wonderful person, and he told me that he really found that it wasn't just a matter of reducing fructose and sugar to lose weight. He had to reduce all carbs. And I realized that was likely true, but the question was why? And so we decided to do an experiment, and we kind of came up with a really interesting idea. And the interesting idea came out of a lot of our research, but we realized that the body can make fructose. Just like we can eat fructose, we can make fructose. So
Interesting.
humans and other animals can make fructose, and you make it from glucose. And it when glucose levels are high,
Hmm.
that's what stimulates fructose production. So when glucose levels are kind of normal, fructose is not stimulated. But when glucose levels go up, fructose is produced. And
I
so
see. Okay.
we just realized that we could test for that. And what we did is we gave laboratory animals glucose in their drinking water. And I told you that they like glucose.
Hmm.
But in my original thinking, they would not get fat because they're not getting fructose. But what happened was, as over several months, these animals that got glucose with no fructose still got fat. So it seemed like it was proving me wrong,
Hmm.
except when we looked inside and measured everything, they were making fructose from the glucose.
Interesting.
And they had that high glycemic carbs, and they were converting it to fructose, along with having high blood glucose.
I
So then
gotcha.
what we did is we gave the glucose to animals that could not metabolize fructose. These are genetically engineered animals. They can still metabolize glucose. They can still produce insulin. All that's intact. It's just they can't metabolize fructose. And when
Hmm.
we did that, we had a big discovery that these high glycemic foods were causing obesity by making fructose in the body. It wasn't
Wow.
from it wasn't from the stimulation of insulin, because they still had high glucoses in their blood. They still had the high insulin stimulation from the drinking the glucose, but they didn't get they were minimally fat. They did gain a little bit of weight. There was some effect. They didn't get fatty liver. They got no insulin resistance. The insulin resistance and fatty liver were strictly from the fructose.
That is a major, huge discovery,
Yeah, it
right?
was a big discovery.
We're talking about turning understanding of how biology works and how we get all these metabolic disorders on its head by completely, it's a different pathway. Yeah, they're related somewhat because one can create the other, but still, fructose,
and,
nobody
and
thought.
right, and the effect is many respects the same. So I wear this continuous glucose monitor
Hmm.
because if I eat a lot of bread or something, or if I eat some starchy foods like potatoes and my blood glucose goes up, I'm not worried about the insulin being stimulated. I'm
Hmm.
worried about the fructose being made. So you
Wow.
still want to keep your glucose levels controlled,
Hmm.
but the reasoning is different.
Now, here's a
And
question. Yeah.
yeah,
Is it, can you eat one bad meal a day and not have a bunch of fructose created, or is it have to be chronic high glucose that creates the fructose?
oh, that's a great question. We really have not done those experiments. But I will tell you that there is a group in Switzerland that was able to show by labeling sugars with specific carbons and stuff, and doing this kind of thing. They were able to show that when you drink one soft drink, not only are you getting the fructose from the soft drink, but you dramatically increase the amount of fructose your body makes by threefold just with one drink. So,
Wow. It's a double
and
whammy then.
and we also did this very interesting study where we blocked fructose metabolism in animals that were given just a regular diet that's very low sugar,
Hmm.
and we followed them for years. A couple of years till a mouse is quite old. And when we block this fructose pathway, and these guys are not really eating much dietary fructose, we
Hmm.
could block a lot of aging effects. So this is relevant to you, so
Wow.
to your podcast. So
Yes.
what we think's happening, their blood pressure didn't go up with age. They stayed lean. They maintained good energy levels. They didn't get aging associated changes in their kidney. Their kidneys stayed normal looking. And
Wow.
maybe they would have lived longer, but we sacrificed them. So unfortunately,
Okay.
we couldn't. We should have just seen if they would like live longer. But
Mhm.
I think they probably would because there was they preserved a lot of things that you want to preserve with aging. And so my guess is that our regular diet contains things that stimulate some fructose production in us, and it's probably not good enough to just restrict sugar. We
Mhm.
have to restrict high glycemic carbs a bit. I really believe that helps. And we've discovered another way animals and humans can become fat, and that was also a big surprise. It came out of the same story, but basically, once we realized that the body could make fructose, we started thinking, what other foods can make fructose? And we knew that you can stimulate fructose production if the salt concentration in your blood goes up. And when
Mm.
you eat salt, you'll get thirsty. And
Mhm.
whenever you get thirsty, you're actually stimulating this pathway. So it's like a small stimulation to say, hey, I need more energy. I need to activate this pathway. And so what happens is, so we decided to do an experiment where we gave animals salt, and we know that sugar causes obesity pretty quickly.
Mhm.
Salt took a lot longer time, so it
Okay.
wasn't a rapid thing. But like after 4 or 5 months, suddenly these guys got huge,
As
and
compared to sugar, how long did it take for sugar for them to get fat on
like
sugar?
2 to 3 months for sugar, four to
Okay.
five months for
Okay.
salt.
Okay.
And when we looked, they had that fructose that they were making in their liver. And when we blocked fructose metabolism, we could block the development of obesity, fatty liver, insulin resistance, hypertension.
Wow.
Even the hypertension from salt is probably through this pathway. And so we, then we looked at human studies, and believe it or not, although we've always think of salt as being associated with blood pressure,
Mhm.
there was 10 studies published that had linked salt intake with obesity, and we actually did some ourselves, looking at it in Japanese population where there's a lot of salt. We
Mhm.
found that it predicted fatty liver and diabetes independently, partially independent of calories. There was a caloric effect, but
Wow.
anyway, so now we think that the big culprit. I don't want to scare everybody, but the big culprit is sugar, right? The big
Mhm.
culprit is high fructose corn syrup. That's the big gorilla in the room. That's
Mhm.
the one, and it's in so many foods. And soft drinks are your number one offender. And when you drink a soft drink, you activate the pathway faster than if you eat it, because when you drink, all that fructose hits the liver quickly, and the
Mhm.
energy levels fall faster than if you sipped it. So if you sipped a drink over an hour or 2 hours, it would probably just be like a calorie. But when you drink it fast, that overwhelms, the energy levels plummet, and then you activate this pathway. So soft drinks are your big culprit.
Mhm.
But what we learned is that high glycemic foods and salty foods can also do it. And so French fries, everybody, if you're a fructose believer, you would say, well, why does French fries cause obesity if it's fructose? Because potatoes are starch, it's just glucose. It's got fat and it's got salt. But
Mhm.
now we know that salty foods activate this production, and the starch is providing the fuel, the glucose that's going to be converted. Plus, it will raise the blood glucose, which will activate this pathway.
Yeah.
So
So
now we
it's
know why French fries are so bad.
that's a double
But
whammy
they
then.
taste good, though, right?
Yeah. They're amazing to eat, but you're right. So, Rick, I want to reiterate what I've learned so far. This is really, really important information. So you're saying that fructose is playing the major role in obesity and metabolic syndrome, diabetes, fatty liver, you name it, all these metabolic disorders that we've come to associate with sugar or glucose, actually fructose is responsible for them. And there's three main ways we have fructose in our body. One, you straight up eat it, or two, if you eat a very high glycemic diet, a lot of starch, a lot of carbs, that will convert to fructose. And three, if you eat a lot of salt, that also converts to fructose. So these are the three ways that we get fructose in the body. Yeah.
Those are absolutely right on. There are a few additional things, and one is when we learned. So there was this interesting question of why does increasing the salt concentration in your blood cause obesity? Why would it cause fructose to go up? And I'll just tell you a little story. It turns out that fat, when you store fat, it's like storing energy, right? And so a hibernating bear stores fat because it provides them energy while they're hibernating. So when they're not eating, then the fat slowly breaks down and produces the ATP and energy they need to keep themselves alive during the winter.
Right.
But it's interesting, bears don't drink water when they're hibernating, and long distance migrating birds can go huge distances without drinking water. So where do they get their water? And it turns out that when you break down fat, you produce water. And it's called metabolic water. There's no fat in water. I mean, if you looked, you wouldn't find water in the fat itself. But when you break the fat down in the chemical reactions that occur, there's the production of water. And so it turns out that some of the fattest animals in the world are in environments where there's not a lot of water. So of fresh water. So for example, the camel and desert animals often have a lot of fat to help them produce water when they can't find it. And they try to get the water from the food they eat, but if they can't, they'll break down their fat. And likewise, marine mammals don't drink salt water. They don't drink seawater. So if you're a whale, having that huge store of fat is very useful, not just for insulation from the cold when you're diving, but also as a water source. So, we realize that most people who are overweight, most people who are obese, actually show signs of mild dehydration. And part of that's from eating salty foods. But interestingly, when you eat sugar, you create a dehydrated state as well that helps persist and drives this reaction to make fructose to help you store fat. And so we realize that something as simple as hydrating with water could potentially reduce weight. And in the literature, there was a lot of people talking about hydration and drinking water 6 glasses or 8 glasses a day to help stay healthy. And as a kidney doctor, in the early days of my training, I was thinking, well, that's what the kidneys do. The kidneys know how to hold on to water. But we subsequently did studies, and we could show that that really obesity is slightly dehydrated state. And if you give water, it's like very effective at blocking obesity from developing, but also it can actually reverse obesity a little bit. And so we believe that that just going back to this rule of trying to drink 8 or 10 glasses of water a day can be a very, very healthy thing for you. Now, having said that, it's possible to intoxicate yourself with water. If you drink huge amounts, you can actually drop your sodium in your blood, especially if you're like running marathons and you're doing things like that. So you have to be careful with my recommendation. What I'm talking about is in the regular state where you're not like super exercising, and if your kidney function is relatively normal, you probably should talk to your doctors actually, just to make sure that it's okay for you to drink 8 to 10 glasses of water a day. And don't drink 20 glasses of water a day. Drink 8 to 10, okay? Because if you can overdo it.
Interesting. You just stated that simply again, Rick. This must have been a huge discovery to say that fat creation in the body was actually a means not only for the organism to survive, but also to get hydration from within itself, like a camel, which of course, that makes sense now. But Wow, there's just like evolutionary pathways on evolutionary pathways going on
Yes.
here,
Yeah.
which you can just simply gloss over, but there's a lot going on there. So thank you for bringing
Thank
that
you.
up.
You're welcome.
So bring that. So drink 6 to 8 glasses of water. This will reduce your fat storage, basically, in some
Yes,
ways.
it
Okay.
will.
Okay. So stay skinny and lean and live a long life. All right.
Yeah.
Let's move on. I have a lot more questions. In terms of now that we've established that fructose is bad and we've talked about the 3 ways that your body can make or ingest fructose, what would be some recommendations from you, Rick, in terms of how much of each of these we should eat per day? So when you say, when we say fructose comes from added sugars, from fruit juices, from whatever else we're ingesting, how much of those should we eat per day? Is there any recommendations that you might have?
Sure. So we did do some studies looking at fruit because one of the scary things that comes out of this research is the suggestion that fruit may not be such a good thing, and yet we love fruit, and we have so much data that people who eat fruit tend to do better and to have better lives and to live longer. So this seemed like a paradox. And so we did a series of experiments and clinical studies to try to figure out the fruit paradox. And I'm just going to go through some of these discoveries. But the first one is that when you and I eat a fruit, a whole fruit, there is the sugar content that we're eating, but there's also all the other things in the fruit that we get. And a lot of them are very good. There's vitamin C and fiber and potassium and flavonols and all kinds of things that actually are healthy. So when you eat one fruit, it's typically like 4 or 5 grams of fructose. That's quite a bit different from drinking a soft drink that's like got 20 to 30 grams of fructose. Okay, so it's a huge difference. So the amount is less, and you've got good things in it. And even if you eat several fruits, you've got this, and the fiber slows the amount with how rapidly you absorb the fructose. And we tend to like tart fruits that are very vitamin C rich and contain all these good things. And so there is a big difference from a bear that will eat 10,000 berries in a 24-hour period, and a human who will eat two fruit at one session. So we realize that that's different from fruit juice, where when you drink fruit juice, you blend it and you lose a lot of the fiber. And what happens is you often do it with many fruits, so you'll actually get a larger dose of fructose than you would with an individual fruit. So people had already epidemiologically shown that if you're eating natural fruits, you tend to do well. And if you're drinking fruit juice, it tends to associate with obesity and diabetes. So the pediatricians had already figured this out and recommended limiting fruit juice in children because of that. So that was known 10 years ago. And so what we did a study, we decided to do a study where we give a low fructose diet from reducing added sugars to adults, overweight adults. We did this in Mexico with Magdalena Madero, who's a physician based in Mexico City. She really ran the study, but what she did was she randomized people to a low sugar diet, low added sugar, with or without fructose supplements, fruit supplements, natural fruit supplements. And she actually got improvement in metabolic syndrome in both groups. And weight loss was actually a little better with the natural fruits added. So we think that the natural fruits, in normal amounts, are good. But now, if you sit in front of on a sofa and watch a football game with a giant bowl of grapes and you eat the whole thing, you're going to get the sugar content will be higher than you would with just one or two fruit, and all bets are off there. But basically, natural fruits have a lot of good things that help counter some of the bad things. And it's sort of interesting. It's a study in nature because in nature, when a fruit starts to ripen, it ripens so that the seeds become mature, so that when it falls, it actually wants, if you can think in terms of the tree wanting something, the tree would like the fruit to be eaten, because then the animal will disperse the seeds in its poop and will help actually make more trees. And so the sugar content goes up at the end of when the fruit ripens to attract the animal. In the beginning, where the seed's not ripened, the sugar content's really low, so that the animal won't eat it. And at the same time, the vitamin C and some of these other things are very high, which actually help counter the effects of fructose. And they plummet as the fructose content goes up. So it's sort of this very clever symbiosis, or this kind of working together where the tree is trying to keep things going by producing the fruit and having the animals help disperse the seeds. And the animals like it because as winter comes, eating this fructose can help them store fat, which they need to survive, so that this cycle of life moves forward.
It's fascinating. It's the selfish gene, or the propagation of the species, right? Whatever it takes. Yeah. That's why humans enjoy sex, because it helps propagate the species. Yeah, it's fascinating. Okay, so good recommendation.
I just wanted to know why that was.
There's probably a lot of reasons, but that I don't know. But maybe that's your next research project, right?
Yeah. I have to
why do
work
we
with
enjoy
my
sex?
wife on that one.
All right. Okay, so we talked about how much fruit people should eat in terms of ingesting fructose. Now let's touch on the second pillar, which is, the high glycemic index carbohydrates or just high starches causing fructose to be created in your body. What is your recommendation on how much in terms of carbohydrates you should be eating? High, medium, low, and what does that mean to you?
Well, in general, I'm a low carb fan.
Mm-hmm.
There's some people who can live on a low carb diet chronically and do great, and there's others that find it too difficult to be on a low carb diet. And so I think that there is, you can do it other ways. You don't have to be on a strict low carb or keto diet. But obviously, if you are, that generally will work very well. But you can modestly or mildly reduce carbs, so long as you try to reduce high glycemic carbs and fructose containing carbs. I mean, other than occasional natural fruit.
Yeah.
So there are different options that are good that you could do.
Okay. That is my follow-on question, by the way, is when we talk about the glycemic index of some of these foods, are both the same, meaning a high glycemic food, is that the same in terms of carbs? It is, as a food that releases very slowly in your blood, but does the rate of absorption of the glucose matter in this context?
Yeah, it does. So we have done studies where we've given like apple juice, which is high in sugar, fructose. It's high in fructose. Mm-hmm. We did a study. Mehmet Canby, from one of my collaborators from Turkey, Istanbul, did this beautiful study where he gave apple juice either slowly or fast. And if you give it rapidly, you get this much more profound activation of this pathway, or I call it survival switch. And so it's much more likely to cause activation of obesity. And so he saw much more changes in the blood following a short, rapid ingestion than ingested slowly. And the same is true with glucose. If you eat glucose, like if I give glucose to an animal in the drinking water, they become very fat. But if I give them starch mixed with all kinds of other foods, it takes longer because they don't get that same rise in glucose. So if you have that continuous glucose monitor, if you don't, the basic rule is that if you eat French fries and eat them like that,
yeah,
your glucose levels are going to go up in your blood faster and higher than they would if you ate one French fry an hour for 5 hours. But the trouble is, no one can do that So we tend at the junk food, we end up eating it fast. So we activate this switch and produce the fructose and activate this pathway.
Mhm.
So the very best thing is to kind of know what the bad players are in terms of what causes the high glycemic, what foods are high glycemic, and then to try to reduce the intake of those significantly. And if you do, there is a sort of trick I've done, which I think works. So one option, which is to try to reduce all these high glycemic things like rice, potatoes, chips, cereal,
Mhm.
bread. But there's some people that are just so dependent on these foods that it's very hard for them to succeed at it. And so what happens is they may try for a few days or a few weeks or even a few months, but they can't maintain it. Another option that seems to work that one should consider is to have your high glycemic carbs only in a very limited period of time during the day.
Mhm.
So, for example, like for one meal, you're allowed to have a little bit of rice or potatoes or your bread. And the rest of the day, you try to not eat those super high glycemic carbs. And what that does is it kind of limits the production, to a short period of time of the day and
Mhm.
allows you to kind of be more in a low carbs equivalent the rest of the day. And that can work pretty well
Mhm.
for people who are just unable to stop. And then maybe, you can mix it up with a little bit of intermittent fasting and things like that. That can help. But anyway, I think that once you know how it works, it becomes a little bit easier to design ways to minimize your risk.
Mhm. That's a great answer, Rick. I love that any question that I throw at you, you've got a study and you've got all this data behind it. So
I'm so sorry, I've been around too long.
that's fantastic. You're not pulling it out of a hat.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, no,
Okay.
I really have been involved in lots of studies, and we do have more coming, and
Mhm.
I do hope that at some point you'll have me back. And also, I have a book coming out in February
Mhm.
called Nature Wants Us to Be Fat. It's going to be put out by Ben Bella Books, and it's going to go into this and a lot more. Obviously, there's a lot to these stories.
Yeah, I love that. So I'd love to have you back when the book is out. I've got a few more closing questions here. I'm not quite done. If you've got a few more minutes,
Yeah.
so we touched on the dietary fructose. We touched on high glycemic starches or carbs. In terms of salt intake or eating foods that are high in salt, is there a recommendation that you would have to the listeners?
So the in general, people are eating like 10 to 11, 12 grams of salt a day, and a lot of that is because salt is in processed foods, and it's unbelievable how how salt can be added to foods and you're unaware of it. And
Hmm.
so try not to add salt to food, right? But for example, like there some stores where you can buy like these shrimp and stuff and meats. And like I was investigating this because I was curious, So I saw that they will inject salt water into like shrimp to make the shrimp big and look
Mm,
nice, and sometimes they'll even give some color. And
interesting.
you can sometimes see, they sometimes note this on the package. Anyway, so they inject these shrimp, and then you come home and you put them on your frying pan, and then all the water comes out and they shrivel up into these little tiny things. You go, what is that? What I bought, really? But you've got all this salt there, and so it turns out that processed foods have a lot of salt. And if you make a homemade lasagna, it will have very little salt. But if you buy a packaged lasagna, it might have a lot. So reducing processed foods can have a big impact on reducing your salt intake.
Okay,
What we
great.
What I recommend is, you probably want to, if it was possible, you'd want to reduce your salt intake to 4 to 5 grams a day. I wouldn't restrict it to the point where food's unpalatable,
Hmm.
but like 4 grams a day, and then you match it with drinking a lot of water. And if a food is salty, just drink a lot of water with it, because what activates the switch is not the salt; it's the salt concentration in the blood. So if you eat salt and then you're thirsty, you're activating this switch. But if you drink water first and keep that salt concentration low, you're not. So, it's silly, but like if you're in a bar and they're serving pretzels, drink a glass of water right away if you're going to eat any of those pretzels. It's smarter because we haven't done the experiment, but it's going to relate to that. We did do a similar experiment. This guy Mehmet Cambi, my friend from Turkey, did a really cool study where he gave soup to people, and the great thing about soup is you can add salt, and no one can really tell often.
Right.
If it's like a creamy soup, it can be quite salty, and you don't realize it. So he gave this salty soup to different people. It was a randomized study, but he gave water with the soup at different amounts of water. And he found that if you drank water, a lot of water with the soup didn't activate this switch. And for example, if you just drink a bowl of soup, your blood pressure goes up in 15 minutes. You have high blood pressure.
Wow.
It's just that there's an immediate salt blood pressure effect. And it activates this pathway that leads to fat. And if you drank water with it, he could block that. So it could be as simple with the salt. It's really how much salt and how much water. And if you can keep yourself from getting thirsty with salt, then you're good. I mean, I think popcorn. I used to think popcorn was like the perfect food because it was like low calorie, but it's not. The salt is activating, this ability to make sugar inside your body, or fructose. So you drink a lot of water if you're going to eat popcorn.
Good to know. Good to know. I thought it was pretty healthy as well. Now, we've established, Rick, that the fructose in the sugar, is really bad for a lot of reasons that we discussed in this show. Is the future of medicine in your field, in this field, blocking the metabolism of fructose inside our bodies?
Yeah, this is probably a good place to end. Yes, this whole idea that fructose might be playing a major role in metabolic syndrome has been recognized now by many pharma companies. And so there is a move to try to make inhibitors to block this. I have to disclose myself that I actually have a few patents on this, and I formed a small company to make fructose inhibitors with the idea really of taking my science to the clinic. Not so much for the financial issues, but really because the ultimate thing for a scientist is to actually see the research go to the clinic. But there are larger pharma companies that are also making these inhibitors that are obviously working at a higher level and a more rapid level than I can.
Okay. And you've spent your entire life doing this, Rick, so don't feel bad about making money. You deserve every penny that you make out of these patents or the company that you launch. You mentioned you're writing a book that also has a section regarding aging.
Yes.
I'd love to have you back when the book is closer to launch, but are there any tips for people that are listening that want to live a healthy life until they're 150 years old, let's say? What might be your top like 2 to 3 or 4 tips that they should do now as preventative that helps them live that long?
Well, yeah, we can go into it in more detail with the next visit.
Sure.
But I think that trying to do things that can block this activation of this low energy pathway is the first step. And there are other steps, which is like to recreate and to replenish your energy mitochondria, or what makes energy. But I like to that's too big a topic to do right now. But I think if drinking 6 glasses of water a day, taking 250 milligrams of vitamin C a day, we can talk about that later. Eating some natural fruit is good, and just trying to be wise in your food selection, reading the labels, trying to avoid sugar and so forth. But there is a bigger story that we can talk about next time as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would love to have you
Good.
back on when you're ready. Rick, where can people find you or connect with you or read up your papers, honestly?
Well, I'm in the process of putting together a website. I hope it will be up in August. I'm hoping. I think it's going to be Dr. Richard Johnson, and also we're going to set up a website for my new book, Nature Wants Us to Be Fat. And so we're beginning to put. I realize I've been a scientist most of my life, and this idea of writing a book, that I need to figure out a way to get my information out. I am on some YouTube videos where people film me while I'm giving talks and stuff. But yeah, I'm looking forward to developing a website where I will be sharing stories, including from nature, evolution, history, and from the lab, and turning it into practical points. So,
Yeah. You're doing great work, Rick. So as many people that can be exposed to what you're doing, I think it'd be very, very beneficial to all of us.
I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to talking to you again. It really was a very nice session.
Thank you, Rick. Appreciate it. We will talk soon. Okay.
Yeah, bye.